Hello. So, yeah, um, this is going to be a bit of a different video. I'm awful at editing, so to try and make my life a bit easier and your videos a bit more interesting and full of content, I thought two things. I could try doing this so that we can feel like it's a bit more of a conversation and less of me just reading off a script on a railroad. And secondly, I'd like to try and move. I like still writing scripts and having all my stuff kind of organized and what I want to talk about. I don't want to just be rambling for 40 minutes, but it does make it harder to speak when I'm trying to read off of a script and balance things out. My tone sounds a bit. It's like listening to a text-to-speech version of myself when I hear some of my videos, and I want them to have a much better flow in terms of my voice at least, so that's what I'm going to try and do here. So, let me know, like, what you guys think of this. Like, obviously, drop any comments down below, would be much appreciated. Sorry if, this isn't what you wanted, for lack of a better term. You can also let me know down below, but please try and keep it moderate. Right, so this video is still well, it's a little bit of a weird one. I will still be doing lore videos, obviously. Nothing's changing with that. The style of video may be changing a bit, but again, let me know, because I'm also really quite terrified of how this will do, or how this will be received. So I just really miss a old game mode on League of Legends called Twisted Treeline. It was known as Twisted Treeline or 3v3. It had 3 players pitted against each other, like the name kind of suggests. And the reason people quite liked this game mode, or I liked this game mode, was because it had a focus on a different meta, a different kind of playstyle. It was much more heavily focused around skirmishing and around aggressive plays, and as a result of this you generally had shorter game times, which 10 years ago was something that was quite important to me, and still kind of is. Maybe that's why I'm missing it a bit more. Maybe it's because it's now been a decade since the game mode first came out, and when I realised that I got slightly nostalgic. Who really knows nowadays? There were also some unique communities that existed as a part of this kind of 3v3. One of the most notable was probably Double Doran's. If anyone knows that site, just, you know. Yeah, so today we're going to be discussing kind of what on earth was Twisted Treeline and why I, for some reason, still seem to have it stuck in my head, even though it was removed like over 3 years ago. Hello again. You don't know I left, but I did, and I'm back. I hope you're well. I'm slightly insane. Right, so, the original 3v3. Quite a cool map. Do people know much about it? Probably not. I know I don't know much about it because it was like around 10 years ago now that the original 3v3 map existed. So if I get any of the details wrong, I am sorry. My memory it's okay, but it has limits, and I wasn't necessarily thinking I'd be making content about the Twisted Treeline when I started playing League of Legends. So, the old map, it had top lane, pretty standard. It didn't have a mid lane. There was just no mid lane. It's gone. Just gone. And then you had bot lane. And in between these two lanes, you had the jungle. On the jungle, you had 3 camps on each side. And then you had this kind of formation at the top that would hold the 2 unique buffs and the boss of the map. So it was pretty like a compressed version of Summoner's Rift, I guess. And you would have 3 players. Normally you would have one that would go top lane, one that would go bot lane, and then you would have your third player would be the jungler. Sometimes I speak to people who don't play League. They pull a face like they want to understand. but they have no clue what you're talking about, and they're far too polite to tell you that. Yeah, that's what talking about League to someone who has no clue what League of Legends is like. But anyway, moving on from my little side bit. So you had these unique buffs. So you had two. The first was from the Ghast, and the Ghast is like a ghost. Very standard name. We don't really have anything like it in League on the Summoner's Rift, so I can just show you guys a photo. And this is also what the buff looked like. Now, the buff itself would give you 30 bonus move speed for 60 seconds, and it would basically let you be very fast. So, obviously this was great on champions like Hecarim, but, you know, again, this was a very long time ago, so I don't particularly remember the meta for this, and also at the time I was first getting into League, I probably was playing awful things and had no clue what I was doing. So, yeah, there is that. Then you had the second buff, right? So the second buff came from the wolves, or Merc wolves? No, Merc wolves are what we actually have on Summoner's Rift. These are Merc wolves, and these are rabid wolves. And trying to get my hands to point in the right place for this took like 10 tries. The Crest of Nature's Fury was the buff dropped by the Rabid Wolves, and this would give you 20 attack speed and 10% cooldown reduction. It was okay. Again, I was pretty new to League, so those things probably meant nothing to me. To me, I probably cared more about how I made my champion look when I actually picked up the buff than what the buff did. I'm called bad at this game for a reason. So those were the two easy buffs to get, and then obviously there's this boss monster. Now you may be thinking vilemaw. It was called ebonmaw, like ebony and maw. Ebonmaw was called the Terror of Zorn, and never got mentioned again, so that's fine. I just went on like the most random tangent, and I'm so happy I can cut it out for you. So ebonmaw would have this buff. It was the equivalent of fighting the dragon on Summoner's Rift. Dragons are quite different now, obviously, but this was what you would fight as the boss monster. It was located right in the middle of this like weird cornucopia formation at the top of the map, and you would kill this and it would give the buff. Now the buff was pretty cool. It would give you 1% increased damage for every level you had. So at level 10, this is 10% increased damage, which is okay. Level 18, this is 18% increased damage. That's a fair amount. This was back in the days when Deathfire Grasp existed, so you could do some really funny things. Not that I did, because again, I had no clue how to play the game at the time. I remember building Sapphire Crystal on Nocturne because I was running out of mana. So that's where I was in terms of understanding the finer mechanics of League of Legends at the time. Right. One of the more interesting things that I kind of liked, because again, I was awful at games, right? I was not good at League. I was playing it because my friends were playing it, and I could tell you numerous atrocities. I built 6 Vamp Scepters on Jax because I didn't want it. There are too many mistakes that I have made that are just stuck up here that I just will never be able to justify. But anyway, part of my difficulty with playing the game was understanding vision. At the time, vision was very different. You had to pay for every ward. You didn't get a trinket. You didn't have free wards, and it was really... I struggled to get gold as it was, so the idea of having to now try and spend that gold on wards was a really scary idea that I wasn't really a fan of. So when 3v3 said, we don't have wards, we don't have vision... Okay, so, turns out, right, fun fact, that bit I just did about not wanting to do vision. You could actually get vision in the original 3v3. Like, I apparently just played that game mode for like... And not once did I even realize that you could buy wards in the shop. But I was particularly awful a decade ago. Right, moving on. Alright, so now we're in a bit more of a familiar territory, per se. This is the big rework. So, Riot changed just about everything. You've got your top lane, your jungle, your bot lane, and you've still got this centerpiece, and that's where you'll find the boss monster. So they now had a new boss monster. They now had, in each of the jungles, they had these altars, and the altars were pretty important, basically. When you took one of the altars, you would get plus 80 gold for each member of your team. So in a team of 3, that was 240 gold for the team. And that's pretty... It's not bad, right? It's literally free. Another thing that would happen is it would reveal vision around these areas, and then you would get a buff depending on how many of these altars you control. So if you control your altar, which would be on your side of the map, that's generally what you would be defending. If the... Look, I'm losing my words here. If you had one altar, then this would give you 10% bonus move speed. And this would allow you to kite better, it would allow you to rotate around the map faster, get back to lane faster. It was pretty much just a good generic... It's very hard to get someone or a champion that struggles to use just moving faster. And there are very few situations in which moving faster is going to be a bad thing. So, when you have 2 of these altars, you would then get the buff that every minion or monster you kill will restore 1% of your max health. It wasn't great. It gave you a bit of sustain in lane. It let you clear jungle with a bit more health, I suppose. It really was not the biggest deal. The bigger deal was now that your opponents would not have their 10% bonus move speed. Like, it's hard to just describe. If you were playing in-game, you would feel it almost immediately, that your opponents, they just can't catch you anymore. And it meant that if you had some kind of advantage, it was very easy to run down the enemy team and keep that advantage and push for a win in some way, shape, or form. Then again, the altars were also really cool because the comeback mechanics they enabled, just by stealing altars from your enemy, being able to get the bonus gold, use the move speed to do some kiting. I don't know. It was a fun element to add into a pretty fast-paced game that allowed for some strategy. Okay, so one other thing that did exist within the reworked 3v3 map would be a health relic. And I don't particularly, know if this was just what I did, or what me and my friends did, or if this was what everyone did, but it seemed to happen in most games, where for no reason, and I still couldn't tell you this reason today, every member of both teams would come to the middle of the map at the start, and you would just try kill each other. It was just bruisers punching each other in the face within the first 30 seconds of the game starting. It was very fun. I can't even remember why people would do it, because surely your brain would tell you, that's Trendemir level 1, maybe I shouldn't go and try it, but they do it anyway, and it was fun. That was just a small tidbit, just about how 3v3 tended to play out at the start of the match. It was very different to what we have in 5v5, where one side will normally try to invade, and then there will be a fight over that. Instead, it's like both teams agree to just meet by the dragon pit and start a 5v5 at the start of the game for no reason. that was the common practice of 3v3, and looking back, I still have no idea why anyone did it. I lost a lot of games off of it, I won a lot of games off of it. I think just boredom, mainly. It's keep the game exciting is maybe why people did that. But yeah, it was quite fun. Then you had, well, the new ebonmaw, which in, I suppose, tribute to ebonmaw is called vilemaw. Now vilemaw, unlike ebonmaw, canonically still exists and is actually featured in Legends of Runeterra even after their retirement. So that's nice. They're quintessentially linked to Elise in the lore as the spider god. Very cool stuff. But they're not in League anymore, and I just wish they were. Anyway, so vilemaw was a pretty cool boss monster as far as they go. It was a giant spider. It had a pretty cool Easter egg where if you had multiple teammates dancing next to it, then the vilemaw would dance along. Which is, it was cool. I'm not sure what relevance it had in terms of gameplay or plot, but it was definitely a nice Easter egg. So the vilemaw itself was kind of like the Baron. It was a stationary target, it would not be able to move or chase you. It was pretty strong, and as it attacked you, it would reduce your magic and armor resist so that you would be able, well, or wouldn't be able, I suppose, to fight it if you didn't have a way to sustain the damage or multiple teammates in order to dish out enough damage that you don't die. So it was a pretty cool boss monster, but one of my favorite mechanics had to be what happens when you start a fight with vilemaw. So vilemaw had this unique mechanic where upon becoming aggroed, it would send out this huge web that would cover the entire pit that it lived in or resides in, and then it would pull everything into that pit. And there were so many ways that you could do things with this. Like, if you were Nidalee, she was probably one of the easier characters to do this with, and you're being ganked, you can run into the vilemaw pit, run to the other side, and as the enemies come in to chase you, you would throw a spear at the vilemaw and then jump away, and it would pull the enemies in, and then you're home free. It was great. It was such a cool little outplay mechanic that you had the potential with, and I don't know, maybe it was unhealthy because only a select few amount of champions would ever be able to access that as an escape route. Possibly. I don't really know. The buff it gave was pretty cool. So the buff that vilemaw gave you would be, I thought it was the crest of vilemaw, if I'm being completely honest. Okay, it was called the Crest of Crushing Wrath. Now we know. So, the vilemaw, upon being able to actually kill the thing, would give you this Crest of Crushing Wrath. And it was a pretty cool buff that really matched the thematic of Twisted Treeline very well. For lack of a better term, you would become spooky. Your minions would move faster, they would become ghosted, and attack faster, and it would help you to push lanes faster. Then, enemy minions, when you run at them, would become scared, and would basically flee, allowing your minions to hit them for some free damage, and push even faster. So the Crest of Crushing Wrath was a way to really accelerate the game state and push up maybe an inhibitor or make a final push towards the enemy's nexus. So you had the vilemaw buff, and then you also had a range of unique items that were only available on 3v3. Now, for mages, I think one of the favorites that a lot of players would really call quite strong if it was available on the Summoner's Rift had to be Wooglet's Witch Cap. The best way to describe Wooglet's Witch Cap is if you take Rabadon's Death Cap and Sonia's Hourglass, and you were to put the two items together, that is effectively what Wooglet's Witch Cap was. It was an insane item that offered loads of utility and power to mages, so yeah, that was pretty cool. Do you ever have to do things many times and then just wonder why you're doing them? No? Okay. Wooglet's Witch Cap even had a upgraded version in the form of Wooglet's Witch Crown that was available from Ornn, so it was a pretty strong item. Not that I really even understood how Ornn passive worked at that time, but another of the unique items that was available was an item called Moonflare Spellblade. Now, for those of you who play ARAM, that probably doesn't sound like an unavailable item, right? In ARAM, it's available as a starter item, and it does a similar thing, but it was actually a end item. Oh, I don't really know what the term would be. I suppose a legendary item by our current item classing scheme. It would give you plus 50 ability power, armor, and magic resist with a passive that gave you 35% tenacity. So, or tenacity. Who knows? Who truly knows? This was pretty helpful for getting around crowd control and allowed mages to basically become a bit tankier while also getting some power. It was a pretty cool item. I don't really remember too many people being able to use it other than tank mages like Maokai or Vladimir. They were the prime candidates. But, you know, it was cool. I liked it. I think it's pretty cool that it still exists in ARAM. I always love it when League is able to take an item and put it somewhere else instead of just remove it entirely. Okay, you then had Lord Van Dam's Pillager. Yeah, this item's a bit of a weird one, I'm gonna be honest. It was a tanky AD item that would have different effects depending on which altars you controlled. Lord Van Dam's was probably intensely misunderstood and probably underused, if I'm being honest. Reading what it does now, it actually doesn't sound too bad. So, Lord Van Dam's, if you had your altar controlled, so the side that is closest to your nexus, then you would basically be set on fires, a bit like sunfires. It would slowly burn enemies over time who were close to you, and it was nice. It dealt bonus damage to minions and monsters, and would help you to, I don't know, clear jungle or push lane faster, while also being pretty effective if you built this on someone who is constantly on someone's face. On someone's up. Sometimes words are not easy. That is what I have found here. Anyway, so if you controlled the enemy's altar, then what would actually happen is your basic attacks would now apply a burn for damage over time. So if you had both altars, you would have an effective sunfires and then a burn with damage over time on all of your autos. So this was a really good item for if you had control of the map and you were an AD kind of bruiser or tank that wanted to get a bit more damage and also have sustained fighting power. So it was pretty good. I don't particularly remember using it too often, if I'm being honest, because I did not understand what those things meant when I was, like, first getting into League. Now, I mentioned that Vision was something that I was not particularly fond of, and I'm very fond of it now. I really love Vision. I try and... well, I probably spend too much gold on control wards nowadays, but... that aside, Vision on 3v3, when the map was reworked, was removed. You were not able to buy wards in the shop anymore, and that's good, because I didn't even know you could buy them. So, effectively for me, nothing had changed, apart from you now had a trinket. So, what this would allow you to do is, it was called Arcane Sweeper, and it would be in the trinket slot that we have today, and you would use this and it would sweep an area, revealing anyone with true sight. So it was very, very helpful. Like, it was almost... I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. It's like a short-ranged blue trinket that also acts as a red trinket. Yeah, it does sound quite funny, but maybe some footage can help, like, explain or show or visualize what on earth this thing did. So it would keep a area swept, and you could use this kind of in a lot of... Just, there were lots of situations where it was maybe more helpful than it should have been. My favorite, personally, was against champions that used stealth, because you could just reveal them. It was so helpful. You could use it to face check, well, not, you could use it to check bushes, you could use it to reveal champions who were hidden in stealth. There was a lot of utility to it, and having it on a cooldown meant that once you saw the enemy use it, you were pretty much good to do something that you knew would abuse the fact they didn't have vision. So it was a nice way of implementing vision. I'm still just shocked that I didn't even know that there were wards. Like, I would have hoped that I would have remembered there were wards in the shop, but I didn't even know. So yeah, you had this reworked map, and it was what kind of most people would often remember as 3v3, because the original 3v3 was only really around for 2 seasons, and I only really played it for around 6 months when I was first getting into League of Legends, and yeah, I can't remember too much of it standing out. I think the rework was pretty impressive in terms of how it changed the gameplay and made it stand out with its own unique thematic. I really liked it, and I miss it. But yeah, the 3v3 I've just covered is a lot of what players mean when they say they miss 3v3 or they wish 3v3 was still here. And if you don't know any players that do miss 3v3, I don't know. Just ask people. It's really not that hard to find someone who missed this map, I hope. Because truly, well, I suppose we'll talk about it and you'll see why you may not know someone who misses this map. Okay, so you're probably, familiar with the map now. We've gone over it. We've gone into how it was made originally, and then how it got reworked. But I haven't really started to talk about why it got removed. And this is where it becomes a bit problematic. See, the Twisted Treeline was an okay map, but it often meant that a lot of players, generally, who tried to play 5v5 or Summoner's Rift a lot, wouldn't necessarily be able to transfer all of those skills onto 3v3. So, let's start to discuss basically where it started to go wrong. So one of the main problems with 3v3 that was cited by Riot Games when they actually announced its closure was the player count. Now, I don't have stats, so I can't really show the player counts and say, hey, there were people playing, or hey, there weren't people playing. But I can tell you that it would make sense that not everyone liked 3v3. For example, if you were a AD carry or AD carry player, going on to 3v3 would be your nightmare. You can't play a champion like Jinx, who requires to grow steadily throughout the game, and then actually kite out enemies, because the map is so quick to play around and skirmishes happen so frequently and often that you are really unable to leave your tower without the enemy top laner or bot laner just walking straight up and just killing you because you're an ADC basically alone. And there were certain situations you wouldn't be able to make this work in, because there's only 3 of you. So if you did pick a support, and then you had an ADC, they would be in separate lanes, and would have to try and group up, or you just abandon one of your lanes, or you have to abandon the jungle. There was always a compromise if you were trying to play an ADC in 3v3 that somewhere left extra resources for the enemy team to take from you. So yeah, 3v3 maybe wasn't the best for ADCs. In terms of support players as well, supports did see play, but as far as I can remember, they were in a similar thread to ADCs, really. If you were someone who was squishy, who didn't have hard CC, who didn't have a way to escape all of the bruises, the fighters, the assassins, and the tanks that are going to be running at you all the time, then you probably weren't going to do very well on 3v3. The nature of constantly skirmishing and going for these pretty much all-in attacks means that champions who suffer to sustain themselves in lane or deal damage in response to early damage are really, they will just not be good. There were just some champions who would not work well on this map, regardless of how good you were on the champion. And that was definitely a major disincentive for a lot of players to want to try and play it. Because why would you play 3v3 if you can't play your favorite style of champion? It makes sense to me. So low player counts were one of the things, because 3v3 was great if you were an assassin, if you were a tank player, a mage, a jungler. There were lots of accessible champion routes, but not all of them. This is where problems kind of started to arise. Because 3v3 wasn't played as actively by players, it became prone to some pretty unique issues at the time. So there was actually a period in League of Legends where all of the bots decided to use 3v3. And I remember playing this, and we had a severe bot who was awful. We lost because the enemy just kept killing her, and then they killed us. And it was very confusing, because I had never really seen botting in League of Legends before. For all the bugs and problems it has, generally they keep a okay handle on scripting and botting. Botting was just a problem. Players didn't want to play against bots. Players don't want to win because of bots or lose because of them when they're trying to play PvP. So that, again, probably pushed a few players away. I can see why players who were hesitant to play it in the first place could go over, play against bots, be there maybe this isn't for me, and then just not come back. Okay, so I mentioned that the meta was a bit more than restrictive in terms of just the generic map design. Yeah, it was. Because of the power scalings and the fact that most of the time the game would end around mid-game, and getting to 6 items was probably not really a realistic goal, because your Nexus or their Nexus would be blown up long before then. There were some problems that would kind of arise if you wanted to play every kind of champion that exists within League. And there were mechanics that just didn't function with 3 players. I think one of the most easy to understand would be something like Rengar. Now, Rengar gets a headhunter, or headhunting. Rengar has a passive where basically he'll get a stack for people that he kills. So if he kills every member of the opposing team, he gets all of his stacks, and these stacks will give him bonuses. Now, these bonuses have changed over time, but at the time that Rengar was alive and 3v3 was alive, there was an interaction where his jump range would be increased by getting these bone necklaces. So this is where it starts to get a bit funny. How do you get 5 stacks when there's only 3 potential stacks to get? So Riot were a little bit smart in some cases with how they tried to approach it, and less so in others. Gangplank would just get Silver Serpents for standing still. Every second he would get one. So normally Gangplank has to try and last hit using his parlay in order to get this special currency that he uses for upgrades in a shop only he can access. In 3v3 it's quite different. He could sit there and use his parlay to just attack you. Just constantly, always hitting you. Like the dude would not stop. And then he would still get his money. It could be very annoying when you met Gangplank players who understood this and would use it in order to kind of be a lot more aggressive than they should be, because they didn't really have to worry about trying to farm those Silver Serpents. Yeah, so Gangplank became quite strong. Shyvana's passive was maybe one of the smarter adjustments, where it basically does the same thing it does on 5v5, but with vilemaw. It will give some bonus armor and magic resist every time she kills it, and she gets bonus damage towards it. One of the better examples, where it's not really forcing any different kind of playstyle, it's not really changing anything about the champion's inherent power, it's just letting them do what they would do on the other map in 3v3. So that was fine. The runes. Ravenous Hunter, a problematic rune that ended up being removed because it was just giving sustain to people for basically doing well, which arguably is an okay reward to players for doing well, but in 3v3, it was... You could get a stack of your Ravenous Hunter, or your Ultimate Hunter, or any of the Hunter, runes, by taking one of the altars. So, if you were to take your altar and the enemy altar, that is 2 stacks. Now, this is where it starts to get problematic, right? Because... sure, at the time there was nothing that really abused this. Nothing was too bad. Ravenous Hunter was very popular. Ingenious Hunter was maybe kind of popular. Relentless Hunter was very popular for roaming. But, again, they were okay. The game design of League of Legends is something that often is not looked at in the same lens. Let me try level with a way to explain this. There are aspects of Summoner's Rift that do not inherently work with the design of the Twisted Treeline. One of these being a river. There is no river. There is no water source. Why would there be? It's the Twisted Treeline. Where would it go? I don't particularly know. Maybe it runs through the whole map. I'm not a map designer. But the point is that there wasn't a river. So when you have something like water walking, a rune we have in today's version of League, that cannot be used on the map. And if you tried to take water walking, it would be replaced by Scorch, because there's no water, right? Now, I was talking about the Ingenious Hunter, the Ravenous Hunter being problematic. We now have a rune called... is it Treasure Hunter or Bounty Hunter? I'm pretty sure it's Treasure Hunter. I'll put it up here for you guys to see. Okay? This rune today, if 3v3 was still around, would be pretty good. Because you could get the bonus gold just by claiming the altars. That's 2 stacks, and then that means your next kill actually has the gold efficiency of a 3rd stack, and you only still, again, have to kill 3 people to get the maximum gold out of this. Throw that in with the fact that it's a fast, accelerating game state, and that there are champions who can snowball harder off of getting these kills, and Rengar might just be one of the scariest things possible if 3v3 were allowed today. Being able to make that jump into assassin items using all of this free gold advantage that's given just by playing on the map, it's some scary stuff. So you're starting to hopefully see here how there's some problematic design. And given, the fact that 3v3 was designed so long ago, I don't realistically know how Riot could have seen this coming. Like, did they know that a river would have been so important? I don't know. I'm not Riot and I can't speak for them, but I would assume that they weren't thinking more than half a decade ahead in terms of their champion releases. It just seems way, almost impossible levels of organization and planning. And that can be highlighted with the release of Qiyana. So Qiyana was basically a big no-no to 3v3. When she was first released, you could have argued that that was the sign that Riot were going to be getting rid of 3v3. See, it's not problematic when you have a rune you can't use, or a rune that works better, or maybe a champion that just does a bit better on this map. That's arguably fine. Qiyana cannot use one of her 3 forms. Qiyana has fire, wind, and, wind or grass. I don't know which in particular it is. Okay? And then ice. Now, in order to stun people and use CC, which is quite strong on Qiyana, I've heard. Quite important to her combo is the ability to lock someone down before you actually then continue the combo. But hey, I'm not a Qiyana player. Maybe water wasn't needed ever. But yeah, so Qiyana literally was not functional on 3v3. Like, you could not play her if you wanted to stun people, because there was no river. And this was a problem that you can't really fix. Like, you would have to add a river to 3v3, or create some unique mechanic where Qiyana can get water, the ice element, from something on the map. And that's quite specific. Like, I don't know how they would have solved that one. And if you look at Belveth, that's even bigger in terms of the problem that's created, because there's no Rift Herald on 3v3. There is no way for her to get Baron or Rift and get the Void Coral that gives Remora. So effectively, when you play a champion like Belveth, if they, were able to play 3v3 today, it means that you are cutting out or sacrificing core parts of the kit in order to play that champion on the map. The map design, while being incredibly fun, was subject to some design flaws that maybe weren't possible to see at the start of the development. Now, is there a way they could have fixed this? Maybe. But then it starts a different discussion. So overall, you could argue that 3v3 was becoming a bit of a detriment to Riot. They have new ideas that they want to release, they are constantly having to make adjustments for new things that they do release, a good example being all of the support items when they were released. Well, yeah, they had to make a custom version of every support item that would be tailored to the 3v3. And considering that supports weren't even a viable option, this did help, but it didn't change much. You didn't have an influx of support players suddenly playing 3v3, and it's not like if you queued up as an ADC, you would suddenly have a place in a match. So yeah, there were a few problems that were created just by the existence of 3v3, and they do add up, you know? It was hard to access for a lot of players. It had problems with botting. It was restricting Riot's design to move forward and create more intuitive champions. Whether or not that's for better or for worse isn't what I'm trying to debate here. I'm just trying to point out that Riot were being held back by this game mode that was originally supposed to be expansive. So, how did they respond? Well, they got rid of it! If you've read the title, you've heard me say I miss it. You know it's gone. You know, it's not hiding anywhere. I wish it was. 3v3 was a map that ultimately just had to go because of the direction that League was heading in. They wanted a much more all-round focused map. They wanted Summoner's Rift to be something they could truly focus on. And I think after we see the changes, or saw the changes that they did make after they removed Twisted Treeline and introduced teamfight tactics, that 5v5 is, whether you want to argue better or worse, receiving more attention than it did when it was split between the 3v3 team. So, yeah, it's a bit of a weird one, because I really do miss 3v3, but a large part of this video has been realizing that, well, it was kind of doomed from the start. So, overall, 3v3 was kind of just one of my favorite maps. It's really where I played way too many games of League of Legends at odd hours, and I really enjoyed it. I think that it's because of the champions I played, and because of the playstyle that I most appreciated that I was able to do that. But overall, it was nice. And looking back at it, it does suck that it's gone. I think in making this video I've realized that it's gone for a good reason, and that if it were around today, there would probably be some horrendously unbalanced champions that exist within its powers. But it was nice when it was there. It was fun while it was there. And without taking things to a philosophical level, can you really appreciate something if it never ends? So yeah, that was 3v3. This video was a bit, I suppose, personal, because it's basically me almost complaining about the fact I missed something. Please do let me know how you think of this style or this video. I'm really going to be paying a lot of attention to any feedback or comments you have. I understand if this is a shock or people don't like this, and I apologize in advance. Thank you everyone, and take care. So there we have it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up button and consider subscribing if you're interested in the content. I stream occasionally on Twitch, and you can find my links down below. Take care.